Black Maid whispered, "My father and brother did this." The billionaire's response shocked all. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much." The room fell silent so suddenly that even the quiet hum of the air system seemed loud. At the far end of a long glass conference table stood Lena Carter, a young black maid wearing a plain gray cleaning uniform and holding a folded cloth in trembling hands. The executives seated around the table stared at her as if she had stepped into the wrong universe. Polished shoes rested on thick carpet worth more than she earned in months. Dark suits leaned back in expensive leather chairs. None of them expected a cleaning worker to be standing inside the private boardroom of Hawthorne Holdings during an emergency meeting. Lena kept her eyes lowered at first, staring at the reflection of the bright ceiling lights on the marble floor. She could hear the faint echo of her own breathing. Her heart beat so loudly she wondered if everyone else could hear it. At the head of the table sat Richard Hawthorne, the billionaire founder whose name stood on the glass tower outside like a monument. His presence filled the room without a single movement. Tall windows behind him revealed the skyline of Manhattan stretching for miles under a pale afternoon sky. A few moments earlier the room had been filled with tense voices and legal arguments about a financial disaster that threatened to collapse a massive corporate merger. Now there was only silence and the stunned eyes of powerful people staring at a woman who cleaned their offices after dark. Lena finally lifted her head. Her voice came out barely louder than a whisper, fragile but clear enough to reach every corner of the room. "My father and my brother did this." The words seemed to freeze the air. One executive blinked as if he had misheard her. Another leaned forward with open disbelief. A lawyer slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the table, studying her as though she had just confessed to something impossible. A security guard near the door shifted his weight and waited for an order. No one spoke for several long seconds. Lena felt the pressure of every gaze pressing against her skin. She knew what they were thinking. A maid had just claimed that her own family was responsible for the financial sabotage that had shaken a billion-dollar corporation that morning. Her hands tightened around the cleaning cloth until the fabric twisted between her fingers. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind while walking through the silent halls before sunrise. Still, the reality felt heavier than she imagined. Across the table, Richard Hawthorne watched her without expression. His sharp eyes did not carry the open disbelief of the others. Instead, they studied her carefully, as if he were searching for something deeper than the words she had spoken. When he finally moved, it was only a slight motion of his hand resting on the polished table. The movement was calm, but it immediately stopped the murmurs that had begun spreading around the room. His voice when he spoke was steady and low. "Let her stay." The guard stepped back. The executives fell quiet again. For the first time, Lena lifted her eyes fully and met the gaze of the most powerful man in the building. In that moment, she realized something had already changed, and the truth she carried was about to shake far more than a single meeting room. Lena Carter remained standing at the edge of the conference room table while the silence stretched longer than she expected. The executives around the room looked at one another with growing suspicion, their earlier shock slowly turning into something colder. One man with silver hair leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. His voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "That is a serious accusation, young lady. Are you confessing, or are you making up a story to get attention?" A few low murmurs followed his words. Lena felt the heat rise in her face, but she did not step back. She had spent too many nights rehearsing the truth to retreat now. "I am not confessing," she said quietly. "I came here to stop something worse from happening." Another executive laughed under his breath. The sound was not loud, but it carried the kind of contempt that Lena had learned to recognize during her months working in the building. "A maid stopping corporate sabotage. That is a new one," he muttered to the woman beside him. The lawyer at the center of the table slowly pushed a stack of documents aside and fixed Lena with a narrow stare. "If what you are saying is true," he said carefully, "then your family is responsible for a cyber intrusion that has already caused this company to lose tens of millions of dollars in market value this morning alone. That is not a small thing." Lena swallowed. The number sounded even heavier when spoken aloud by someone in a suit worth more than her yearly wages. I know, she said. That is why I came. The lawyer tilted his head slightly. Then perhaps you should start explaining how a cleaning worker discovered something our entire security department did not. A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the room. Lena glanced down at the floor again for a moment, gathering her courage. The polished marble reflected the ceiling lights, like small white suns. When she looked up again, her voice was steadier. My father and my brother used to work here, she said. Years ago, before they were dismissed. They were software engineers in the security division. Some of the executives exchanged confused looks. One of them whispered something to the man beside him and began typing on a tablet. Richard Hawthorne remained silent at the head of the table, watching Lena with the same calm focus. Lena continued slowly. My father taught my brother and me how to recognize certain programming patterns. Everyone writes code differently. It is like handwriting. When I saw the alert messages this morning on the screens in the operations hallway, I recognized the structure. The room grew still again. A woman near the end of the table frowned. You are telling us that while pushing a cleaning cart you somehow identified the digital fingerprint of a complex cyber attack, she said skeptically. Lena nodded once. I was not looking for it, she answered. But I knew the pattern. My father always used the same logic structure when building access keys. He called it the double gate method. It repeats the same verification command twice before allowing entry into a protected system. I saw it in the error log that appeared on one of the monitors. Several executives leaned forward now. The earlier amusement had faded from their faces. Lena could feel the tension shifting in the room. Someone was listening now. One of the technology officers quickly pulled a tablet closer and began searching through system reports. The tapping of his fingers became the only sound for several seconds. Finally, he stopped and looked up with a puzzled expression. The attack log does show a repeated authentication pattern, he said slowly. Exactly the way she described. A quiet wave of unease spread through the room. The silver-haired executive who had mocked Lena earlier frowned deeply. Even if that is true, he said, that still does not prove your family was responsible. Lena drew in a slow breath. I know it was them, she said softly. Because the encryption tag attached to the intrusion includes my brother Marcus' initials. He has used that marker in every project he has written since high school. The man at the tablet froze for a moment before scrolling again. His eyes widened slightly. Richard Hawthorne finally leaned forward. For the first time since Lena had spoken, his voice entered the room again, calm and measured. And how would you know that, he asked quietly. Lena met his gaze again. Because, she said, I helped him write his very first line of code when I was 12 years old. Lena Carter's words settled over the room like a weight that no one could ignore. For several seconds nobody spoke. The executives who had laughed only minutes earlier now watched her with a mixture of doubt and uneasy curiosity. The technology officer at the table continued scrolling through the system report on his tablet, his brow slowly tightening as he compared lines of code with what Lena had described. Finally, he cleared his throat. The authentication pattern she mentioned is real, he said quietly. It appears throughout the intrusion sequence. The double gate verification method repeats exactly as she described. A few people shifted in their seats. The silver-haired executive who had challenged Lena earlier leaned forward again, his voice sharper now. Patterns can be copied, he said. Anyone could imitate another programmer style if they wanted to create a false trail. Lena did not argue. She had expected that reaction. Her eyes moved briefly toward the floor before lifting again. My brother never hides his signature, she replied softly. He believes good code should be recognized. It was something our father always taught us. That statement stirred another ripple of murmurs around the room. Across the table, the technology officer raised his head again. There is more, he said slowly. The encryption tag attached to the breach includes a developer marker. The initials MC appear at the end of several command lines. The silver-haired executive frowned. And you are telling us that stands for Marcus Carter, he said with clear skepticism. Lena nodded once. Yes, that is his habit. He always places his initials where only someone who knows him would notice. One of the younger analysts sitting near the wall spoke up hesitantly. I remember reading about a security engineer named Daniel Carter who worked here almost a decade ago, he said. He left after an internal investigation. Several heads turned toward him. The lawyer immediately opened another document on his laptop and began searching company archives. Within moments, the name appeared on the screen. Daniel Carter, former senior engineer in the Cyber Defense Division. Terminated 8 years ago following a dispute over system protocols. The lawyer looked up slowly. That would be your father. Lena answered with a quiet nod. Yes, sir. Another silence followed, but this one felt heavier than before. Richard Hawthorne finally stood from his chair. The movement was calm, but it carried authority that instantly silenced the room. He walked slowly along the side of the long table until he stood only a few feet from Lena. Up close, he seemed even taller, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his expression impossible to read. When he spoke, his voice was measured and steady. Why would your father attack a company he once helped protect, he asked. Lena hesitated for the first time since entering the room. Memories pressed against her mind like distant thunder. My father believed this company abandoned him, she said quietly. After he was dismissed, he lost everything. Our home, his career, his reputation. He told my brother that powerful people destroy lives and never pay the price. A few executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard Hawthorne studied her face carefully. And yet you walked into this room knowing your words could put your own family in prison, he said. Lena took a slow breath. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but her voice remained steady. If I stayed silent, innocent people would suffer, she answered. This attack is not finished. It is only the beginning. The technology officer looked up sharply from his tablet. What do you mean, he asked. Lena turned toward the screen he was holding. My brother always builds his programs in stages, she explained. The first intrusion weakens the defenses. The second stage triggers the real damage. If nobody stops it, the system controlling your financial transfers will shut down within the next hour. For the first time, genuine alarm spread across the room. Several executives began speaking at once while the technology team scrambled to confirm what she had just said. Amid the rising tension, Richard Hawthorne did not move. His eyes remained on Lena Carter, as if he were measuring something deeper than the crisis unfolding around them. Then he spoke again in a calm voice that cut through the chaos. Show us exactly where the second stage will begin. The tension inside the boardroom shifted from disbelief to urgency the moment Richard Hawthorne spoke those words. Show us exactly where the second stage will begin. Lena Carter felt every eye in the room turn toward her again, but this time the expressions were different. The earlier mockery had faded, and something sharper had replaced it. Concern. The technology officer pushed his tablet across the polished table toward her. The screen displayed lines of complex system logs and scrolling command strings that meant little to most of the executives in the room. Lena hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer. The bright screen reflected in her eyes as she leaned forward. She pointed to a cluster of repeating entries buried in the middle of the data. There, she said quietly. The pattern repeats every few minutes. That is how my brother tests whether the gate is still open. If nobody interrupts the sequence, it will activate the second command soon. The officer quickly enlarged the section she indicated. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen as he examined the structure more carefully. His expression tightened. She is right, he said after several seconds. The code is building toward another process. If this activates, it could redirect the company primary financial routing system. A low wave of alarm moved across the table. One executive stood up abruptly. Redirect the routing system, he repeated. That controls our international transfers. If that shuts down, we could lose hundreds of millions of dollars in a single day. The lawyer immediately began speaking into his phone, calling the internal cyber defense team. The room that had once been calm now buzzed with controlled panic. Yet Lena remained still beside the table, watching the screen. She had seen the same logic structure years ago on the old family computer in their small apartment when her father and brother would work late into the night writing code together. She remembered the sound of keys tapping in the dark kitchen and the glow of the monitor reflecting in their faces. Her father always said that code told a story if someone knew how to read it. Across the room, Richard Hawthorne continued watching her with quiet intensity. He had not returned to his chair. Instead, he stood with his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, studying both Lena and the screen as the specialists confirmed her warning. After several moments, the technology officer looked up again. The second stage will activate in less than 40 minutes, he announced. If she had not pointed out the pattern, we might not have noticed it until the damage was already done. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. The silver-haired man who had mocked Lena earlier now looked distinctly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and spoke more carefully than before. If her brother created the breach, perhaps she also knows how to stop it, he suggested. The room quieted again. Richard Hawthorne turned slightly toward Lena. "Can you stop it?" he asked. Lena did not answer immediately. She studied the code, once more feeling the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Stopping the program would mean betraying the two people who had once meant everything to her. But allowing it to continue would destroy thousands of livelihoods connected to this company. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I believe I can slow it down," she said. "My father designed the double gate system with a hidden failsafe. He always said every lock should have a secret key in case the door had to be opened again." The technology officer leaned forward eagerly. "Where is that key hidden?" he asked. Lena pointed to another line within the log sequence. "Right there," she said. "It looks like a harmless system. Check, but if someone inserts a reversal command inside that line, it forces the gate to reset, and the entire program stalls." The officer immediately began typing instructions to the cyber defense team in the control center several floors below. The executives waited in tense silence as the seconds passed. On the screen, the sequence continued repeating like a ticking clock. Lena stood motionless beside the table, feeling the strange shift in the room. Just 1 hour earlier, she had been invisible to these people pushing a cleaning cart down quiet hallways. Now the fate of a billion-dollar corporation hung on knowledge she had carried since childhood. Richard Hawthorne finally spoke again, his voice calm, but unmistakably respectful. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "if this works, you will have saved my company from disaster." Lena did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen as the countdown toward the next command continued moving closer. The boardroom remained frozen around the glowing tablet screen as the repeating sequence of code continued to scroll downward like a silent countdown. Lena Carter stood beside the table with her hands lightly resting on the polished surface, her eyes fixed on the command pattern she knew too well. Every few seconds, the same authentication cycle appeared again, like a heartbeat inside the system. Across the room, several executives whispered urgently with their legal advisors, while the technology officer maintained an open connection with the cyber defense team on the lower floors. The tension was thick enough to feel in the air. Finally, the officer received a response through his headset. He pressed his hand against the earpiece and listened carefully before turning back toward the table. "The reversal command is ready," he announced. "They are waiting for confirmation before inserting it into the gate sequence." Lena felt a tight knot in her chest. This was the moment that would decide everything. Once the reversal command entered the system, her brother would know someone had interfered. Marcus Carter was not the kind of programmer who ignored interference. He would recognize immediately that someone inside the building had understood his work, and there was only one person he would suspect first. Lena Carter slowly exhaled. She had known this risk the moment she walked into the room. Richard Hawthorne noticed the change in her expression. He stepped slightly closer to the table and spoke in a calm voice meant only for her. "You understand what this means," he said quietly. "If your brother is responsible, he will realize someone here stopped him." Lena nodded once. "Yes, sir," she answered. "He will know." For a moment, Richard studied her face carefully. There was no anger there and no panic. Only the steady look of someone who had already accepted the consequences of her choice. The technology officer cleared his throat again. "We cannot delay much longer," he said. "The next command cycle will activate soon. If we interrupt the gate before that moment, the attack stalls. If we miss the window, the second stage begins automatically." All eyes turned back to Lena. She looked at the screen one last time. The repeating code pattern flowed past like water through a narrow channel. She remembered sitting beside her father at the kitchen table many years ago while he explained that every strong lock must also include a hidden exit in case the system itself failed. He had built that principle into everything he created, even the program her brother had written now. Lena straightened her shoulders. "Insert the reversal command now," she said. The officer immediately relayed the instruction through his headset. Everyone in the room watched the tablet screen in breathless silence. A few seconds passed. Then another line of code appeared within the sequence, and the repeating authentication pattern suddenly froze. The scrolling text stopped moving. For a long moment, nothing else happened. The officer leaned closer to the display as fresh system alerts began appearing. "The gate has reset," he announced with disbelief. "The intrusion sequence has stalled." A collective breath released across the boardroom. Several executives sank back into their chairs while others exchanged stunned looks. The lawyer lowered his phone slowly as if he could not quite believe what had just occurred. The technology officer continued reading the system updates with growing relief. The program has lost its access pathway, he said. Without the second gate, the entire attack collapses. Lena remained still beside the table, but the tight pressure in her chest slowly eased. The building was safe for now. Yet even as the relief spread across the room, she knew another reality was already unfolding somewhere beyond the walls of the tower. Her brother Marcus would soon discover that his program had been stopped. And when he traced the interruption back through the network, he would find the one person who had always understood his code better than anyone else. Richard Hawthorne finally looked away from the screen and turned toward Lena again. His voice carried across the quiet room with a tone that was very different from when she first entered. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, "it appears that you have just saved this company from financial disaster." Lena lowered her eyes slightly, but she did not smile. Because somewhere beyond the glass windows of the tower, she knew a storm had only just begun. For several moments after the system alerts confirmed that the intrusion had been stopped, the boardroom remained quiet except for the faint electronic hum of the tablet resting on the polished table. The tension that had filled the room only minutes earlier slowly began to loosen, but the silence that followed felt heavier than relief. Executives who had spent their entire careers controlling billion-dollar decisions now found themselves staring at the young woman in a gray cleaning uniform who had just protected their entire network. Lena Carter did not move from where she stood beside the table. Her eyes remained lowered as if she were still listening for something deeper beneath the quiet. Across the room, the technology officer finally removed his headset and placed it carefully on the table. "The cyber defense team has confirmed that the breach has been neutralized," he said. "The financial routing system is stable and the intrusion pathway has collapsed." A few quiet sighs of relief passed through the room. One executive leaned back and ran a hand through his hair, while another closed his laptop slowly, as though he needed a moment to absorb what had happened. The silver-haired executive who had questioned Lena earlier now looked at her with a different expression entirely. His voice carried less arrogance when he spoke again. "Miss Carter," he said cautiously, "it appears we owe you a great deal more respect than we showed earlier today." Lena did not answer immediately. Her thoughts were not inside the boardroom anymore. Somewhere beyond the tall glass windows of the tower, she knew Marcus Carter was already discovering that his program had stopped responding. Her brother was brilliant, but he was also relentless. When something interfered with his work, he never walked away quietly. Richard Hawthorne observed her carefully. While others in the room focused on the victory over the cyber attack, he seemed to be studying the woman who had made that victory possible. After a moment, he returned to the head of the table and rested his hands lightly against the polished surface. His voice was calm, but it carried authority that immediately brought the room back to attention. "Everyone leave us," he said. The request surprised several of the executives, but no one questioned him. One by one they gathered their documents and quietly left the room until only 3 people remained. Richard Hawthorne, Lena Carter, and the technology officer who still stood beside the tablet screen. Hawthorne turned slightly toward the officer. "Please remain available downstairs," he said. "I may need you again shortly." The officer nodded and left the room, leaving the billionaire and the maid alone in the silent boardroom. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The skyline beyond the windows glowed in the pale afternoon light, stretching across Manhattan like a field of glass towers and steel bridges. Finally Hawthorne broke the silence. "Your brother will know someone stopped him," he said quietly. Lena lifted her head slowly. "Yes, sir," she replied. "He will know very soon." Hawthorne watched her expression carefully. "Are you afraid of what he might do next?" Lena considered the question for a moment before answering. "Marcus does not like to lose," she said. "When he believes someone has challenged him, he pushes harder. That is how he has always been." Hawthorne walked slowly toward the window and looked out across the city. The reflection of the skyline shimmered across the glass surface beside him. Then he turned back toward her. "Your brother attempted to destroy my company today," he said. "Yet you chose to stop him even though you knew it would expose your own family." Lena stood quietly, absorbing the weight of his words. "I did not come here to destroy my family," she answered softly. "I came here to stop something worse." Hawthorne studied her face again. "And what would be worse than this?" he asked. Lena met his eyes without hesitation. "The kind of revenge that burns everything around it," she said. For the first time, a faint expression of understanding crossed the billionaire face. And in that quiet moment inside the boardroom, something shifted between the most powerful man in the building and the woman who had once been invisible walking its hallways with a cleaning cart. The quiet inside the boardroom stretched longer after Lena Carter spoke those words. The kind of revenge that burns everything around it. Richard Hawthorne stood near the tall windows with the skyline of Manhattan behind him, his reflection faint against the glass. For a moment he did not respond. Instead, he watched the city far below where traffic moved like thin streams of light between steel towers. Lena remained beside the long conference table with her hands resting lightly on the polished surface. Without the crowd of executives, the massive room felt almost too large, the silence echoing against the marble floors and dark wood walls. Hawthorne finally turned back toward her. His expression was thoughtful rather than cold now. "Tell me something, Miss Carter," he said calmly. "Why did your father leave this company so angry that your brother would risk prison to destroy it?" Lena lowered her eyes slightly. The question did not surprise her. Anyone who looked at the situation from the outside would assume revenge had begun with her brother. But the story had started much earlier. "My father believed he was betrayed," she said quietly. 8 years ago, he discovered a vulnerability in the company's security structure. He warned his supervisors that if it was not repaired, someone could eventually take control of the financial routing system. Hawthorne listened without interruption. Lena continued slowly, choosing each word carefully. But the warning created conflict inside the department. Some executives believed repairing the system would delay a major merger at that time. My father refused to remain silent about the risk. He argued with senior leadership until the dispute became public inside the company. Hawthorne folded his arms thoughtfully, and he was dismissed. "Yes, Sir," Lena replied. The official explanation said he violated internal communication policies. But my father believed he was punished for telling the truth. After that, no major technology firm would hire him again. The accusation of misconduct followed him everywhere. The room grew quiet again as the weight of that story settled into the air. Hawthorne walked slowly back toward the conference table. The light from the windows reflected across the polished wood as he stopped a few feet from Lena. "What happened to him after he left the company?" he asked. Lena took a slow breath. At first, he tried to start a small consulting business. But most clients were afraid to work with someone whose name had been connected to a corporate investigation. Eventually, the savings ran out. My brother Marcus was still in college studying computer engineering. He watched our father lose everything. The house, his career, his reputation. Lena paused for a moment before continuing. Marcus never believed the company was innocent. He believed powerful people destroyed our father to protect themselves. Hawthorne remained silent. The accusation hung between them, even though Lena had not directed it at him personally. She looked up again. "I do not know every detail of what happened inside the company 8 years ago," she said. "But I know what it did to my family. My father became a different man after that. And Marcus decided he would prove the company wrong someday." Hawthorne studied her expression carefully. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet honesty. Yet the implications were clear. The cyber attack that nearly destroyed Hawthorne Holdings had not appeared out of nowhere. It had grown slowly from years of resentment and broken trust. After a moment, Hawthorne spoke again. "And where is your father now?" Lena hesitated. The question carried a sadness she could not hide. "He passed away 2 years ago," she said softly. "Illness took him before he could ever repair what was broken." Hawthorne lowered his gaze briefly, as if absorbing that detail. When he looked up again, his voice was calmer than before. "Then your brother is fighting a battle that your father never finished." Lena nodded once. "Yes, sir. But Marcus believes destroying this company will somehow restore what our father lost." Hawthorne looked toward the silent tablet screen on the table where the frozen lines of code still remained. Finally, he spoke again in a thoughtful voice. "Sometimes revenge feels like justice to the person who carries the pain." Lena met his eyes steadily. "But justice and revenge are not the same thing," she replied quietly. And in that moment, the distance between the billionaire and the maid felt smaller than either of them expected. The quiet words Lena Carter had spoken remained in the air long after she finished. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. Richard Hawthorne did not answer immediately. He stood beside the conference table with one hand resting on the polished wood, studying her as if he were reconsidering everything he believed about the situation unfolding around them. Outside the tall windows, the late afternoon sun had begun to shift lower across the skyline, casting long reflections of glass towers across the river. For a moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Hawthorne spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "You came here knowing this could destroy your brother. Lena lifted her eyes slowly. I came here because if I did nothing, this company would collapse and thousands of people would lose their jobs, she said. That kind of destruction would not bring my father back. Hawthorne considered that answer carefully. Many people in this city speak about loyalty to family, he said. Very few would choose to protect strangers instead. Lena looked toward the frozen tablet screen again, where the halted lines of code remained like a silent memory of the attack that had almost succeeded. My brother believes he is correcting an injustice, she replied softly. But pain does not disappear by creating more of it. Hawthorne watched her expression closely. In all his years of negotiating billion-dollar deals, he had learned to recognize when someone was hiding behind words. Lena Carter was not hiding anything. Her honesty carried the weight of someone who had already paid a heavy price. A faint vibration suddenly interrupted the quiet. The tablet on the conference table lit up again as a new alert appeared on the screen. Hawthorne stepped forward immediately. Lena moved closer as well. The display showed a series of incoming signals probing the company network once more. The technology officer voice returned through the internal speaker connected to the system. Sir, we are detecting renewed activity from the same external source. It appears the attacker is attempting to reopen the breach. Hawthorne glanced briefly toward Lena. Your brother has discovered what happened, he said calmly. Lena nodded slowly. Marcus always tests the door again when it suddenly closes, she replied. It is how he confirms whether someone interfered. The officer voice continued through the speaker. The intrusion attempt is more aggressive than before. Whoever is behind it is scanning every entry point in the system. Hawthorne folded his arms thoughtfully. He is trying to find another path. Lena studied the incoming command lines appearing on the screen. Yes, she said quietly. Marcus does not stop once he believes. Someone has challenged him. He will search until he finds a weakness. The tension that had eased only minutes earlier returned instantly to the room. Hawthorne looked toward the ceiling speaker. Seal every external gateway and isolate the financial routing servers, he ordered. I want the entire cyber defense team focused on containment. Yes, sir, the officer replied before the connection ended. Hawthorne turned back toward Lena. Can he break through again? He asked directly. Lena did not answer right away. She watched the scanning attempts move rapidly across the screen like invisible fingers pressing against every locked door in the network. Marcus was brilliant and relentless, but she also knew something else about him. He never abandoned a challenge once it became personal. If he believes someone here stopped him, she said slowly, he will treat this like a duel. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow slightly. A duel? Lena nodded. Marcus does not think like a criminal. He thinks like a programmer, proving he is the smartest person in the room. Hawthorne looked back at the screen where the probing signals continued moving across the network defenses. Then he looked at Lena again. And are you the only person who understands how he thinks? Lena hesitated for only a moment before answering. Yes, she said. Hawthorne held her gaze for several seconds. The situation had shifted again. The attack was no longer simply about protecting a corporation. It had become something far more personal between two people who understood the same mind. Finally, Hawthorne spoke in a firm voice. Then it appears, Miss Carter, that you and I are about to face your brother together. The words Richard Hawthorne had spoken settled heavily between them. Then it appears, Miss Carter, that you and I are about to face your brother together. Lena Carter felt the weight of that sentence more than the tension in the room. For a brief moment, she looked at the glowing tablet screen where the new intrusion attempts continued appearing one after another like waves hitting a wall. Marcus was searching for another door. That was exactly how he worked. When one entry point closed, he never wasted time arguing with it. He simply looked for the next weakness. Lena moved closer to the table and studied the incoming signals carefully. The attack pattern had changed. The earlier method had been precise and quiet, like a careful lock picker testing a single door. Now the commands were broader and faster, sweeping across different parts of the system. He is testing the outer layers now, she said quietly. Hawthorne stepped beside her and looked down at the screen. Explain. Lena pointed to several rapidly changing command strings. Marcus knows the main gateway was blocked, she said. So he is checking the support systems around it. Backup authentication servers. Internal communication pathways. Anything that might still be connected to the financial routing network. Hawthorne folded his arms thoughtfully, like a thief checking the windows after finding the front door locked. Lena nodded once. Exactly. The tablet screen flickered again as another alert appeared. The cyber defense team voice returned through the speaker mounted on the wall. Sir, the attacker has begun scanning the internal maintenance servers. We have sealed the external network, but the probes are still searching for indirect access routes. Hawthorne glanced briefly toward Lena before responding. Maintain full containment, he ordered. Do not attempt counter-intrusion yet. I want to observe his pattern first. The connection ended and the room returned to quiet except for the faint electronic tone of incoming system alerts. Lena continued watching the command stream with deep concentration. After several seconds, she spoke again. Marcus will not stay outside the system very long. Hawthorne looked at her. Why not? Lena answered without taking her eyes from the screen. Because he will treat this like a challenge now. Someone inside the building stopped his program. That means someone understands his code. Hawthorne considered that carefully. And he will want to know who. Lena nodded. Yes. Marcus has always believed he is the smartest engineer in any room. When someone proves otherwise, he cannot walk away from it. The tablet screen suddenly displayed a new sequence of commands forming a narrow line of code that repeated in a subtle pattern. Lena leaned forward instantly. There, she whispered. Hawthorne followed her gaze. What is it? Lena pointed to the repeating string. That is not a scanning command, she said. It is a message. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow slightly. A message. Lena nodded slowly. Marcus always hides messages inside harmless-looking system checks when he wants to communicate without being noticed. Hawthorne studied the pattern again. Can you read it? Lena remained silent for several seconds as she examined the structure of the code. Her heart began to beat faster with each passing moment. Finally, she spoke. Yes, she said softly. Hawthorne waited. Lena looked at the screen one more time before explaining. The pattern is based on an old encryption puzzle Marcus and I used when we were younger, she said. Every third command line represents a letter. Hawthorne glanced back at the tablet. And what does it say? Lena hesitated only briefly before answering. He knows someone inside stopped him, she said. Hawthorne's voice remained calm. And the message? Lena swallowed once before finishing the translation. It says, I know you are there. The room felt colder after those words. Hawthorne studied the screen again with renewed focus. Your brother believes he is speaking directly to you. Lena finally looked up from the tablet and met Hawthorne's eyes. Yes, she said quietly. Because he knows there is only one person who understands his code well enough to stop him. Hawthorne nodded slowly as the reality settled into place. Then it appears the duel has already begun. The final words Lena Carter spoke settled heavily in the quiet boardroom. Then it appears the duel has already begun. Richard Hawthorne remained still beside the conference table while the tablet screen continued displaying the repeating message hidden inside the system commands. I know you are there. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor in long golden lines while the city outside moved without any awareness of the silent battle unfolding high above the streets. Finally, Hawthorne broke the silence. If your brother is speaking directly to you, then he expects a reply, he said calmly. Lena Carter kept her eyes on the screen. Yes, she answered quietly. Marcus never leaves a challenge unanswered. When he sends a message like this, it is an invitation. Hawthorne studied the glowing tablet thoughtfully. An invitation to what? Lena hesitated for only a moment. To prove who is smarter, she said. Marcus always believed intelligence is the only power that matters. Hawthorne folded his arms slowly. Then he will continue pushing until someone answers him. Lena nodded once. That is exactly what he is waiting for. The tablet screen flickered again as the command pattern shifted slightly. New characters appeared inside the system log like faint footsteps moving across a locked hallway. Lena leaned forward again. He is modifying the message, she whispered. Hawthorne stepped closer beside her. The encrypted pattern continued building letter by letter as the hidden code rearranged itself. Lena watched carefully, translating the puzzle in her mind, just as she had done when she was a child sitting beside her brother at the old kitchen table. Finally, the meaning became clear. Hawthorne noticed the change in her expression. What does it say now, he asked. Lena exhaled slowly before answering. It says you stopped the first door, but every system has another entrance. Hawthorne looked back at the screen. That sounds less like a challenge and more like a promise. Lena nodded quietly. Marcus is telling us he is not finished yet. Hawthorne turned toward the wall speaker and activated the internal connection to the cyber defense team. Report the current status of the network, he ordered. The officer voice responded immediately. All primary gateways remain sealed, sir, but the attacker continues probing the internal architecture. We are reinforcing every pathway connected to the financial servers. Hawthorne listened for a moment before responding again. Do not attempt counter-intrusion yet, he said. Maintain observation. The connection ended and the room returned to silence. Lena watched the command pattern continue shifting slowly. Marcus was thinking carefully now. She could almost imagine him sitting somewhere in a dark room surrounded by glowing monitors, studying the same network defenses she had just helped strengthen. Hawthorne spoke again after a moment. Can you answer him? Lena lifted her eyes slightly. Yes, she said. If I place a message inside the system check sequence, he will see it immediately. Hawthorne considered that possibility. And what would you say to him? Lena remained quiet for several seconds while the hidden message on the screen continued blinking like a signal between two distant minds. Finally, she answered softly. I would remind him of something our father always said. Hawthorne watched her carefully. And what was that? Lena looked back at the tablet screen where her brother challenge waited inside the code. Our father believed that intelligence should protect people, not destroy them, she said. Hawthorne nodded slowly. Then perhaps it is time your brother hears that lesson again. Lena reached toward the tablet screen and paused for a moment. She knew that once she answered the message, Marcus would understand exactly who had stopped his attack. The duel would become personal in a way that could never be reversed. Yet she also knew that silence would only push him further toward destruction. Finally, Lena Carter placed her hand lightly against the edge of the tablet and began typing the response hidden within the command pattern. Somewhere far beyond the walls of the tower, Marcus Carter would soon read the words she was about to send. For a long moment, Lena Carter's fingers remained still above the tablet screen. The glowing command line waited for her response, like an open door between two minds that had once understood each other better than anyone else in the world. Richard Hawthorne stood beside her in silence, watching the reflection of the code move across the polished surface of the table. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to sink lower across the skyline, but inside the boardroom, time felt frozen around that single decision. Finally, Lena began to type. She moved slowly and carefully, inserting the message inside the repeating system check sequence so that only Marcus would recognize it. The command line updated, and the encrypted pattern carried her words through the network toward the unknown place where her brother was watching. When she finished, she removed her hands from the tablet and stepped back slightly. Hawthorne looked down at the screen. What did you tell him? He asked quietly. Lena kept her eyes on the command line where the message had disappeared into the flow of system data. I reminded him of something our father always believed, she said softly. Hawthorne waited for her to continue. Lena took a slow breath. I wrote intelligence is meant to protect people, not punish them. The room fell quiet again. For several seconds, nothing changed on the tablet screen. The network logs continued moving slowly, but the hidden pattern remained still, as if the system itself were holding its breath. Hawthorne folded his arms thoughtfully. And now we wait, he said. Lena nodded once. Marcus will read it soon, she replied. He always watches the command logs when he sends a message. The silence stretched for nearly half a minute before the screen flickered again. A new sequence appeared inside the repeating command line pattern. Lena leaned forward, immediately translating the encrypted structure as it formed. Hawthorne noticed the shift in her expression. What does he say? He asked. Lena stared at the screen for a moment before answering. He says father also believed truth should never be buried, she said. Hawthorne studied her carefully. That sounds less like a reply and more like an accusation. Lena nodded slowly. Marcus still believes the company destroyed our father to hide something. The command pattern shifted again as more letters appeared inside the encrypted structure. Lena read the next line silently, and her shoulders stiffened slightly. Hawthorne noticed the change at once. What is it? He asked. Lena hesitated for a moment before answering. He says if Hawthorne Holdings is truly innocent, then it should open the past records of the security division from 8 years ago. Hawthorne's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Your brother believes the truth of your father's dismissal is hidden inside those files. Lena nodded. Marcus thinks the company covered up the vulnerability our father discovered, she said. Hawthorne turned toward the tall windows and looked out across the city for several seconds without speaking. When he finally turned back, his voice was steady but serious. 8 years ago, I was not the chief executive of this company, he said. The leadership structure was very different then. Lena listened quietly. Hawthorne continued. But if your brother believes the past contains the answer to this conflict, then perhaps it is time we examine that past ourselves. Lena looked at him with quiet surprise. You would allow those records to be opened, she asked. Hawthorne met her gaze without hesitation. If the truth can end this war between your brother and this company, then the truth deserves to be seen, he said. Lena turned back toward the tablet screen, where the encrypted message from Marcus still blinked quietly inside the command sequence, waiting for an answer. Hawthorne stepped closer beside her. Tell him this, he said calmly. Hawthorne Holdings will open the archived records of the security division from 8 years ago. If the past holds the truth your brother is searching for, then we will face that truth together. Lena looked at the screen again, knowing that the next message she sent could change everything that had begun long before the attack on the company network. Slowly, she began typing the response that would carry Hawthorne words back through the digital battlefield to the brother who was waiting in the shadows. Lena Carter's fingers moved slowly across the tablet screen as she inserted the message. Richard Hawthorne had authorized. Each character was hidden carefully inside the repeating system command pattern so that only Marcus Carter would understand its true meaning. When she finished typing, she paused for a moment and then released the command into the network stream. The hidden message traveled outward through the company's servers like a quiet signal sent across a battlefield that existed only in lines of code. Richard Hawthorne watched the screen beside her without speaking. Both of them knew that the next response would determine whether the conflict ended or grew even more dangerous. For several long seconds, nothing appeared except the steady movement of system logs. The cyber defense network remained stable, and the external intrusion attempts had paused, as if Marcus himself had stopped to read the message that had just reached him. Lena stood very still while the quiet stretched across the boardroom. Outside the tall windows, the sun had lowered even further across the skyline, and the golden light of evening reflected across the glass towers of Manhattan. Finally, the tablet screen flickered again. A new encrypted sequence began forming within the command pattern. Lena leaned forward, instantly translating the puzzle as the hidden letters assembled one by one. Hawthorne noticed the change in her breathing. What does he say now? He asked calmly. Lena did not answer immediately. She watched the code for several seconds before finally speaking. He says if the records are opened, then the truth will prove everything, she said softly. Hawthorne nodded slightly. That is what he wants. Lena continued reading the new message as it completed itself across the screen. Her expression changed again when the final line appeared. Hawthorne noticed it immediately. There is more, he said. Lena swallowed once before continuing. Marcus says if the records show our father was right, then the world will see what this company did to him. Hawthorne did not look away from the screen. And if the records show something different, he asked quietly. Lena answered without hesitation. Then Marcus will stop, she said. Hawthorne studied her face carefully. You believe that? Lena nodded slowly. Yes, she said. My brother does not destroy things simply to watch them burn. He believes he is defending the truth our father tried to reveal. Hawthorne remained silent for several seconds as the meaning of that statement settled into the quiet room. Finally, he spoke. Again. Then the question before us is simple, he said. Was your father telling the truth 8 years ago? Lena looked back at the tablet screen where the hidden message from Marcus continued blinking inside the system log, waiting for a final answer. Hawthorne walked toward the conference table and activated the internal communication system once more. Retrieve the archived security division files from 8 years ago, he instructed the cyber defense team. I want every record connected to the investigation of Daniel Carter. The voice on the speaker responded immediately. Yes, sir, we will access the archives now. The connection closed and the room returned to silence once again. Lena watched the tablet screen for another moment before typing one more encrypted line into the command sequence. Her fingers moved carefully, placing each letter in the pattern Marcus would recognize instantly. When she finished, she stepped back from the table. Hawthorne glanced at the display. What did you send him this time? He asked. Lena looked at the blinking code where her final message had disappeared into the network. I told him the records are being opened, she said quietly. Hawthorne nodded once. And now we discover whether the past built this war or whether it can finally end it. Lena turned her gaze toward the tall windows where the evening light now stretched across the city. Somewhere beyond that horizon, her brother was watching the same stream of data, waiting for the same answer. And for the first time since the attack began, both sides of the conflict were no longer searching for a way to win, but for the truth that had been buried for 8 long years. The quiet inside the boardroom deepened as the final system request traveled through the company network. Lena Carter stood beside the conference table watching the tablet screen, while Richard Hawthorne waited near the head of the room. The evening light outside had grown softer, and the long shadows of the skyline stretched across the windows like dark glass mirrors. After several minutes, the tablet screen flashed with a new notification from the Cyber Defense Archive server. Hawthorne stepped forward and opened the secure document feed. The archived records of the Security Division investigation from 8 years earlier began appearing on the screen, one file after another. Internal reports, meeting transcripts, risk analysis documents. Lena leaned closer as Hawthorne scrolled through the files, carefully reading each summary line. Finally, he stopped when a specific report appeared marked with Daniel Carter name. Hawthorne opened the document and read the contents silently for several moments. His expression slowly changed as he continued scanning the report. Lena waited quietly until he finished before speaking. "What does it say?" she asked. Hawthorne lifted his eyes from the screen. "Your father was correct," he said calmly. "The vulnerability he discovered in the financial routing system was real." Lena felt her breath catch slightly. Hawthorne continued reading from the report. According to this investigation, several senior managers decided to delay fixing the flaw because the repair would have postponed a major merger at that time. They chose to silence the warning instead. Lena closed her eyes briefly as the weight of those words settled over her. Everything her father had tried to prove had been true. Hawthorne continued scrolling through the document until he reached the final page. The internal report recommended correcting the vulnerability immediately, he said, but the decision was overridden by higher management. Lena slowly looked back at the tablet screen where the encrypted command line from Marcus still waited for an answer. Hawthorne straightened and spoke quietly. "Your father lost his career for telling the truth." Lena nodded softly. "Yes, sir." Hawthorne remained silent for a moment before continuing. "That truth should never have been hidden." He turned the tablet toward her so she could see the report clearly. Lena read the document line by line until she reached the final paragraph, where the company board at that time had approved the dismissal of Daniel Carter under a false accusation of internal misconduct. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Marcus needs to see this," she said. Hawthorne nodded. "Send it to him." Lena inserted the key portions of the report into the encrypted command pattern so Marcus could read the evidence directly through the system log he was watching. When she finished, she stepped back from the tablet and waited. The room remained silent for nearly a full minute before the command line shifted again. A new message appeared from Marcus Carter hidden inside the same encrypted puzzle he had been using since the attack began. Lena translated the message slowly as the letters formed. Hawthorne watched her face carefully. "What does he say?" he asked. Lena exhaled softly before answering. "He says father was right all along." Hawthorne nodded once. The command pattern continued, building another line. Lena read it silently before speaking again. "Marcus says the attack is over." The intrusion attempts across the network stopped immediately, and the system alerts on the tablet faded into quiet stability. Lena watched the screen for several seconds before closing her eyes briefly. Somewhere far away, her brother had finally stopped fighting. Hawthorne looked toward the skyline outside the window where the first lights of evening had begun appearing across the city. "Truth has a strange way of ending wars," he said quietly. Lena opened her eyes again and looked at the silent tablet where the last message from Marcus remained visible inside the code. It simply read, "Thank you for reminding me who we were supposed to become." Hawthorne turned toward her with a calm expression. "Your father tried to protect people with his work. Today you did the same thing." Lena looked down at the gray uniform she was still wearing and then back at the city beyond the glass. She had walked into the building that morning as someone invisible pushing a cleaning cart through quiet hallways. Yet by the end of the day, she had restored the truth that her father never lived to see recognized. Hawthorne spoke one final time in a steady voice. "Integrity does not depend on status, Miss Carter. Sometimes the person who saves the entire room is the one everyone overlooked."